The United Way, WGBH, and FSG hosted a panel discussion to catalyze a community conversation on the type of leadership it takes to make progress against today's complex social issues. On the panel were leading systems thinker Peter Senge, author of The Fifth Discipline, Molly Baldwin, founder and CEO of ROCA, and Alan Casey, founder and CEO of Be the Change. The leadership that will actually turn the tide, the transformational leadership that is required to turn the tide, in many respects is, in our opinion, it's countercultural. The leadership that we need. Not necessarily counterintuitive, because I think many of you sitting in the audience would probably agree with our perspective on leadership, but it really runs against the grain of what is perceived as what strong leadership is that leads to change.
The problem is, overall, I would say that set of images are excessively individualistic. They just put so much emphasis on the person, that person's qualities, their characters. Then, of course, in most of our societies, like ours, still to a high degree, it becomes very kind of gendered. You know, so almost all the images are these great men. And occasionally, oh yes, there's a great woman who often ends up looking a lot like a great man. in style. Tough, firm, you know, this driving quality. And again, it's not like those things are unimportant. It's just that it's such a partial picture. Because the challenges we face, the only thing you can say for sure is we need lots of leaders in lots of places everywhere. You know, all kinds of people stepping forward and doing all kinds of different things. They're just not, I mean, my simplest definition is we live in an era where no matter how effective, the effective use of hierarchical power and authority is simply inadequate for the problems we face. It's that simple.
And I think, you know, the notion of trying to achieve large-scale change through a hierarchical form of leadership was one that we wanted to try to set aside and say, okay, you know, it's a different form of leadership. It's not about organizational leadership. Hierarchical forms of leadership won't work if we're trying to catalyze an entire sector to make progress. And so that's where we came up with this term of system leader as opposed to organizational leader. Say a little bit more about, you know, what we mean by system leader and what are the qualities.
Yeah, well, one level, it's very simple. I mean, as we said just in the header of the article, people who catalyze collective leadership. Because in some sense, it's that collective leadership that we're really looking for. My experience is great leaders, really great leaders, are always great listeners. Again, kind of contrary to the, quote, charismatic, projecting leader with a great message, but really is not very good at listening to anybody. I mean, you meet a lot of people like that, right? And a lot of people in power are absolutely horrible listeners. And occasionally you meet someone who's a great listener. And I guarantee you that person builds collective leadership, because there's nothing that helps anybody step forward in their own capacity as a leader than to be listened to have somebody really hear where they're coming from and say, have you thought about that, John? But it's a really deep question that comes out of listening, not out of telling somebody what they ought to think or do. So I think these are really developable capabilities. That's another kind of irony in all this. But I think it's always been one of the core questions in all leadership. You know, are great leaders born or made?
When we first got together, something you said in our first meeting, I will never forget, and I think it became, so it's core obviously to your work, and I think the minute you said it, it resonated so deeply in terms of what I've seen in terms of leadership and collaborative collective impact efforts. And that was, you know, we're also focused on sort of creating the change out there. But you said in order to create the change out there, you've got to start with the change in here. And not only that, you need to understand how the two are connected. So unpack that statement for us.
So it's actually a very old idea. You might say it's actually one of the cornerstone ideas in the old teachings of leadership. And, you know, I started to come around to it because I just noticed through just the good fortune of the people I got to hang out with and who became my mentors. They had, again, extraordinary variety of personalities and situations and technical skills, but they had this deep commitment to their own growth and development, and they did see them as connected. One of the most powerful gestures a person in a position of hierarchy can ever make is to ask people for help. Don't do it very often. again, caught in the myth that I've got to be the infallible leader at the top of the hierarchy. Our images of control are the control of a machine, not the influence on a living system. So that's, again, part of this mythos. It's not just leadership, it's also, I would say, an inherited set of ideas in the industrial age. A well-oiled organization, right? Isn't that a wonderful phrase? Leaders who drive change. What do you drive? Again, try driving your spouse sometime, right? We've all tried it. And we all laugh because we know what happens. But we have no problem using that language when we move over to the organization.
You mentioned capacities earlier, and we talked about sort of 3 key capacities for system leaders. The first is that they help, as they catalyze collective leadership, part of that is helping everybody else in the system actually see the system in all its complexities, the dysfunctionalities, the patterns, the interdependencies. And that's one capacity that a system leader needs to bring. The second is, we talked about, is how do you help a group, a set of organizations, individuals, get to a deeper level of dialogue so they can get to true shared meaning. We've got Republicans, we've got Democrats, we've got government authorities, we've got community. How do you reach shared meaning on what you're seeing as a capacity? And then third is sort of move from thinking about fixing problems to co-creating shared pictures of the future. So, these capacities, so are those things, in the born or made, are those aspects that can be learned?
I mean, all those qualities that arise over time from really becoming good at reflecting on your own thinking and helping others reflect on their own thinking. You have to have some practices. In some traditions, you would call it practices. It doesn't really matter. Tools, practices, you have to have some things you do on a regular basis that cause you to think and see the world differently.
I'm always fascinated when I talk to people that I consider to be wonderful system leaders in that transition, because it is a challenging transition to sort of move from thinking about your own organization to thinking more about the health of the whole. And we'd love to hear the story of your journey.
Okay. The transition would be the word, and it never ends. I would say that too. For me, I was thinking about Peter talking about being a human being first, which is, the job of every single day. So not much that we do at Roca is easy or simple, and nor was this transition. Mentored by fabulous human beings who were going to change the world, and some who probably did. Kind of social justice orientation, and we worked with young people who were really left out by those systems, and really we were fighting the system, and we were mad at the system and the multiple systems, and they keep leaving everybody out, and we did a lot of fighting and screaming and yelling, and I don't think it was very effective. Sometimes it was kind of fun, but to be truthful. And then we had to let go of who we were and how we saw the world and how we worked. And since that day, we've gotten better, and I'm extraordinarily blessed to say we work with 21 police departments. We're clear. We start with, we love you, whether you love us or not. Just like the young people, we will find a way. And we have the privilege of working on pretty remarkable systems change with those police departments every single day, and probably no more important than at this time in the country, given what's been happening. And so that's kind of what it takes.
As a collective impact organization, our strategy for each of these is to build coalitions. So we try to do collective impact. We try to find, and I'm a practitioner, so first we go to all the practitioners in those areas and say, can we work together? And our Service Nation Coalition now has over 500 organizations. Our Opportunity Nation Coalition has over 350, and our Got Your Six Coalition, that's a newer field, has about 30 of the leading veterans empowerment groups. And then once we get people together, we say, can we work on a common agenda? Where can we find the common ground in terms of policy change? Can we work on a cultural change agenda, because we think changing the culture is so important? And can we both highlight important programmatic breakthroughs, because we also feel like you have to learn from practice, and are there programmatic things we can do together? And it's all inspired, as you said, Peter, by Gandhi, who said, you must be the change you seek in the world. And a recognition that, and I love what you said about, we are sort of in love with the hero leader, and the focus of our organization is more recognizing that great change always comes from citizens first. If you think about this country, it was the citizen soldiers of the revolution. Yes, we had the founding fathers and mothers, but without the citizen soldiers, there's no revolution. I am into systems change, and the reason I started City with Michael Brown and others is because I really believe that national service is a system-changing idea that, I mean, you talk about walking in other people's shoes and having an experience of authentic leadership. If we had a year of national service for everybody, I think our country and the world would fundamentally change in so many ways. And we ended up not only saving AmeriCorps, but we got a $100 million increase, enough to grow the program by 50%. We ended up demonstrating even more support for the idea. The effort to kill it actually led to strengthening it. And then sort of a light bulb went off my head and said, wow, there's another way to make change, which is do it in coalition, do it in a collective way, do it in a way that you bring people together.
So I think part of the systems work is kind of what's open, what are your sort of unusual partners, how do you move there, and the most unlikely players, you know, will you know, I don't know, take you to the dance and help you shift the music for everybody, I think.
You're always trying to really get a sense of the real priorities for different people, as you were describing. Because in some sense, to make it work, you've got to meet their needs. You know, you may not like them, you may not agree with them, but you have really only two options. Either your composition is really flawed, and you can't work with this group right now, or you got to really understand their needs and find ways to have things occur that can meet very different needs.
Try to think about your work, not just your work, but build in a collective impact piece of your work. There's no, I mean, what I've learned is no one organization, no matter how big, how important, how big the budget, what at any scale, can solve any problem by itself. It's impossible. They're too complex.
And you have to actively let go things that are quite precious. Because if what we need to do is act collectively, really, act differently, really, it can't be just me and you and we sort of find our way to it. It's about what did I deeply and profoundly hold sacred and let go to come to a new place. And so I think it takes you there, and that's the only way to do something really, really, really differently. And I don't think it's easy, and I don't think it's fun all the time, but it is what brings you to the new place, and that's what lets us kind of, I like the kind of whole thing, right? That's how do you make whole, and so that's, as I understand the lesson.